Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a dynamic where you can't quite step into your role as a man? Like your partner doesn't trust your masculine energy and ends up taking charge, leaving you longing for the nurturing you need to heal? What if balancing your inner masculine and feminine energies could transform your relationships and your entire sense of self? Keep listening. Welcome to the Inner Magic Academy podcast. If you're loving our videos, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks and enjoy this episode. Welcome, I'm your host Peter Magic. Today's episode dives into the profound impact of unbalanced masculine and feminine energies in relationships, especially those of us navigating through motherly and fatherly wounds of abandonment or emotional neglect, along with conditions such as autism and how they're perceived in relationship dynamics. We're going to explore why feeling disempowered in your masculine role creates relational imbalances and why your partner might not trust your masculine energy, and how healing your inner child can actually help you step into balance and transformation. So today's question to the podcast is, how can balancing your inner masculine and feminine energies actually help you heal and reclaim your power and transform your relationships? Firstly, let's get into why you feel disempowered in your masculine energy. And the first step is to understand the root cause. And a lot of what actually creates this, not feeling secure, being more in your masculine energy is when you look at an experience such as abandonment trauma, right, it can really impact you at that subconscious level. And, when this happens at a very young age, what you got to remember during your formative years is your focus is almost completely inside your body. So you don't fully know and understand what's happening outside of you, right? And so your survival brain's going to intervene and your ego is going to do whatever it's going to do to protect you. And so it's going to attach a meaning to all the experiences that are happening outside of you. And when you have an experience such as abandonment trauma, right? One of your parents leave your family at a very young age, it's really going to affect your ability to feel secure, right? And when you look in society today, right, you really do notice that, a lot of us do struggle to have more of a healthy balance of both strength and nurturing, right? And this is because, most of us only know how to survive, right? And so that means a lot of our, choices and our decisions are coming from a subconscious place. They're coming from, old programming. They're coming from, old generational stuff, things that have been carried through, things that we're carrying through in our DNA energetically. Our model of reality, what's been projected to us is coming from those previous generations. And for example, my mother was, brought up in environments around alcoholism and domestic violence, and she's seen her own father beat up her mother, right? And, what do you think this is going to do to her? She's going to have to step more into her masculine energy to protect herself. And so, this is why she attracted these partners into her life, right? This is why she attracted someone who is wounded in their masculine energy that, clearly needed to work through so much. And because she was dominant in her masculine energy, they were wounded in their masculine energy and they couldn't step up and take action, take charge, and so they left, right? This is why my father left, because he just couldn't, he couldn't be the provider and stay in integrity and be the father that I needed. So my mother took that role, but then she had this imbalance of not feeling safe in her own feminine energy. And so as a child, because of this experience of, abandonment trauma, I also felt emotionally neglected by her. And this was happening at a subconscious level. She was being the provider. She did whatever she needed to do, to provide for us, to protect us. And so the only way she knew how was to take control. And I didn't feel validated. I didn't feel that, she trusted me to make my own decisions, my own choices. She was trying to control everything whilst I was in that environment, and I could never step outside of that shadow. I could never step and feel comfortable in my own masculine energy, because of that. So, when you realize where these things stem from, you can clearly see that, it's your responsibility to break the cycle. It's your responsibility, through your own relational dynamics to be more authentic and be more expressive, and this is how you step more into harmony in your relationship, is express how you're feeling. But also, when it comes to having wounded masculine energy, it's like you're having to build confidence in yourself. You're having to to step outside of those shadow aspects of yourself, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it doesn't feel safe, even though you don't yet feel secure in your own skin. You're building momentum. You're building that foundation of what it is to be a male in their masculine energy, right? And stay in integrity and do the things that you say you're going to do, so your partner can see that you are stepping up to that role. But they can also know how you feel. They can also know when you need them to meet you with that nurturing aspect, because when they don't meet you with that nurturing aspect, then you're not able to heal. You're not able to step into your masculine energy. You're not able to bring that relationship into a more harmonious balance. When it comes to the impact of trauma on a masculinity, right, where all of these, fears and these insecurities are stemming from, right? They're coming from, feeling unseen, unsupported and unvalidated in childhood. And what this is doing is it's leaving a gap in emotional security, right? So all of the things I mentioned, through my own experience when it came to abandonment trauma and emotional neglect, all of these things, these parts and these aspects of us that were, projecting from this wounded masculine energy, they weren't feeling like, they were trusted, right? And so this is why it was so difficult for me to step outside of, my own shadow and, what was being projected back at me through my relational dynamics, is because, I didn't feel confident to step into that. I felt uncomfortable. I didn't feel secure in that energy because what was being projected back at me was overpowering that. And, and this is what we all attract at a subconscious level. So when it comes to autism, right, autism actually amplifies sensitivity to emotional neglect and rejection. So you might have heard of rejection sensitivity, right? So when it comes to falling under the spectrum, right, and this is something that I've discovered over the past years, that I both fall under both autism and ADHD. And it makes so much more sense as to why I've really struggled, to feel more secure and safe in my own skin, to feel more balanced in both my masculine and my feminine energies, because, of experience of, abandonment trauma and emotional neglect. It's left a lot more of a emotional scars, and I've carried a lot of this, not only generationally, but, through my experience. And because I'm so much more sensitive when it comes to physical sensations and my emotions, I'm more wired in how I'm feeling because of my autism. It's allowed me to have even more compassion, for that experience. And it's made so much more sense as to why I'm here to be a healer on the planet, because I needed to have this gift, this ability to feel more intensely. And I needed to go through that experience to really understand what it feels like to move through that. So when it comes to the relational dynamic, why a partner might take charge and step into more of a dominant role when they don't trust your masculine energy. The reason why this is happening, because at a subconscious level, these wounded parts and aspects of us are playing out, right? And we're attracting these things, right, at a subconscious level. And that's why we're with this person, because, we're here to work through, right? We're here to bring it back into balance, bring our masculine and our feminine energies back into balance. And in a conscious relationship, right, you're going to have people taking accountability for what they're projecting out. They're realizing what is coming out is coming from a disempowered place. And when you have two people who are more conscious and aware of, these wounded aspects of each other playing out, they're going to work through changing that and bringing that more into harmony. And, for example, I met my partner when I was at the beginning of my healing journey, and I put the intention out there to meet somebody who was right for me, because I was ready to now start moving through healing. And so I attracted someone into my life that was more comfortable being in their masculine energy and taking action. And that is based on their conditioning, and I'm somebody who's learning to step more into that role. But then I need to attract somebody who's more conscious and aware, and when I'm more open and communicative about the things that I need, and it's helping my partner meet me where I need her to meet me, to step more in a nurturing role, even though a lot of the time, these parts and aspects of each other are playing out, and I'm, also projecting unconsciously through feeling disempowered in that dynamic, whether that's through anger, resentment, frustration, impatience, all these things. And when you really understand and look into, both sides of the coin, you really start to understand the importance of being more conscious in this dynamic. And we are going to project from disempowered place, but it's what we do directly after that counts, and that's where lasting change can happen. So when you look at these dynamics, right, how it can leave you feeling disempowered and longing for nurturing from your partner, right? That's why it's so important when you're somebody who's experienced abandonment trauma, to really understand where this stuff stems from and really understand what's playing out in this dynamic. When you're more open and communicative about how you feel, being more authentic in how you feel, underneath what is being projected out through feeling disempowered, you're not the anger, resentment, frustration, impatience, all of the things that are playing out in the moment. You're what's underneath that, and what you're feeling underneath that. It's important for your partner to really hear you and know how you feel, because they can then understand you better, and then they know what it is that you need from them. And it's just bringing these things back into balance. And for myself, staying in integrity, doing the things that I'm saying I'm going to do, creating a podcast every week is something that I'm now working towards solidifying. I'm doing this, I'm taking action, I'm doing the thing that I'm saying I'm going to do. No matter how I'm feeling, I'm not always going to feel up to it. And it's important that I start to take more of a dominant role in stepping more into my masculine energy, trusting myself. And my partner can see that, and she can see how much I am taking action, I'm doing the things, and so she can trust me more in that, and she can then soften more and be more nurturing, and we can bring this more into harmony. Do you ever feel like your partner doesn't trust your masculine energy? And how has that made you feel about your role in the relationship? Because we all have these wounded parts and aspects of us that are playing out at a subconscious level, and it's really important for you to really ask yourself these deeper questions. So, now that we understand why these dynamics occur, let's talk about how this imbalance affects not just you, but your relationship as a whole. What's the cost of relational imbalance in a relationship, right? So when you look at the emotional strain, these dynamics can cause when we have, wounded masculine energy in relationships, right? How feeling disempowered in your masculine role, can lead to frustration, feelings of inadequacy, resentment, and emotional outbursts, right? So, these dynamics that we've had with our parent figures, right? We're also attracting in our partners. And unless we work through, breaking the cycle, unless we work through, our wounded masculine energy, we're going to continue to project from a disempowered place. And, it takes its toll in the relationship on both sides, because when you look at the flip side of, your partner, for example, and when you're projecting from this place on how it affects them, they can feel overwhelmed by that dynamic, and they can struggle to step more into that nurturing energy that those parts and those aspects of you are craving, right? So, when you look at this label that's thrown out there, like the man child, right? Why it's so important, why needing nurturing, can also be, misunderstood and create that tension in your relationship, right? So when you're someone who falls under the spectrum of autism, right? A lot of the time when you're projecting from that disempowered place, it does play out through that autism. And because you're extra sensitive to feeling, you're extra sensitive to all of this, it can be a challenge for you, to project more from a conscious place, from a more empowered place when you're constantly faced with that dynamic in that relationship, and your partner can look at you like a man child, and as a child, like a mother looking after a child, and you can then see your partner as a mother, because they're reminding you of the relationship that you've had with your own mother, and because they're just wanting to take charge, take control, because that's what they're used to being, the energy. You can feel like that is your mother telling you to do something, and then you project from that place of disempowerment, and it projects with more of intense emotions and feelings that your partner can feel, and they can struggle to feel safe and secure in their own feminine energy because they're used to being in that. And this dynamic continues to play out for as long as we continue to remain unconscious to it. The more consciousness we bring to this, the more we can work through it, the more we can bring this dynamic back into a harmonious state. And that's the message here is, it's not easy, and we've got to face our shadows through our partners. We've got to face that, and we've got to work through it. And so we have to step outside of our comfort zone, right? So on the flip side, our partner, even though we project from this place, our partner needs to be more nurturing and more patient with us, even though they're challenged with that dynamic. And we need to be more conscious and know when we're projecting from this place, and making more of a conscious effort to see what's underneath that, and to start to project from a more authentic place underneath that. That is the journey here. So to summarize all of this, right, it's so important to really notice things from your partner's perspective as well, because, it can be very challenging for them as well. And I realize just how much of a handful I can be for my partner, because I do have a lot of emotional outbursts, and I'm really wide in that way in my emotions. And I know, and I can understand how that can be at times full on for her. So it's important for you to understand what that's going to do in that dynamic, right? And it's going to create that resistance, and they're going to find it even more challenging to step more in that nurturing role. because they're feeling polarized, burdened by that dynamic, right? And the more conscious you become of this, the more you start to project from a more authentic place underneath what's playing out at that surface level, the more you can create that change, the more they can step more into the nurturing aspect that those parts and aspects of you create, right? So it's really important to understand the challenge that we're actually faced in these dynamics, right? From both sides of the coin. It's really important to understand that, it takes a conscious effort on both sides, but we really need to take accountability, for what we're projecting out, because, we're trying to compensate, for that masculine feminine imbalance on both sides. And so the more we work on those parts and aspects of ourself that project out in those moments between the dynamics that are playing out, the more we take back our authentic power, the more we step into a more of an empowered version of ourselves, the more we bring it into a balance and we can meet each other where we need to meet each other. And, that's important to see the bigger picture, right? And understand, just how societal conditioning and generational trauma have disconnected us from a healthy balance of masculine and feminine energies. You look at all the things you see out in society, and, we are basically children in adult bodies, and we're working through these dynamics within our relationships. That is what a relationship is. And nobody's perfect, right? There's no such thing as a perfect relationship, right? We're all attracting things based at, what's playing out at that subconscious level. And a lot of us, because we have this imbalance of masculine and feminine energies, we're attracting, aspects in our partner to compensate for that, and it's important for us to not rely on that, but to use that to step more into our, balanced energies of masculine and feminine on both sides of the coin. We need to not rely on them to do those things for us, to step more into where they're comfortable. We need to step outside of our comfort zone so we can bring these back into harmony, right? And, the reason why women feel the need to step more into their masculine energy is due to the lack of trust in the masculine. Just look in society today and you see, we're all living in a world of survival of the fittest. It's basically, but we're all carrying traumas. We're all brought into these family dynamics that are imperfect, that are, that we're all having to work through things. And a lot of us are not willing to face our own shadows, or we're unconscious to really noticing where these things stem from. And we're not working on these aspects, and we're looking for something perfect when there's no such thing as perfection. What we really need is somebody who can show us and reflect back to us what we already have within ourselves. It's just reminding of us of who we truly are underneath the surface, and it's on us to face those things and notice when we're projecting from this disempowered place, so we can step more into who we really are, and so we can bring the masculine and feminine energies back into harmony, right? And so, this is what you see in the world. We're all being disconnected from our emotional bodies. We're all being disconnected, from more an authentic expression of who we are. And that's why we all wear masks in this world. And that's why we all present a different version of ourselves depending on the environment or people we're around. And when we feel more safe and secure, when other people are being more authentic, then we can be more ourselves. And this is really what it's all about. And this is why it's so important to have more of an authentic, conscious relationship, and notice when you're not, and when that other person isn't meeting you with it, where you're both taking accountability for what you're projecting out, that it's on you to notice what you're truly worthy of. So to sum up all the things we just discussed, I'll get you to really reflect on this question, right? How has this imbalance in your relationship affected the way you see yourself and your partner. So now let's shift gears and focus on how to begin the healing process and restore balance in yourself and your relationships. Now we're going to get into how to start healing through balancing your masculine and your feminine energies, right? So when it comes to having this wounded masculine energy, right, it's important to, first and foremost, right, step one is to start nurturing your inner child, right? And it's important for you to recognize, how these mother and father childhood wounds actually drive your need for external validation, right? So really to notice when these parts and these aspects of yourself are seeking this external validation, and this is connected to your self-worth, feeling worthy, right? Needing, things in the external world to validate your own worth and your own value, right? And that's why it's so important to start practicing more self-compassion, having more self-compassion for yourself, and learning to reparent, those parts and those aspects of yourself that feel less than, that don't feel like they're good enough and feel like they're worthy, right? And so you need to start connecting with your own emotional body and start to get underneath the surface of what you're feeling, because what's playing out at that surface level, right, is being projected through these unconscious aspects of self, right, that are connected to these abandonment wounds and emotional neglect. As a child, when you were growing into your skin and your focus was still completely inside your body, right? Your ego learned to wear these masks there to protect and to suppress those true feelings, right? So it's important to start to get underneath the surface of how you're feeling and start connecting with those aspects of self. Step two is to reclaim your masculine energy, right? So what that actually means is you need to start to build an inner confidence through having more structure, responsibility, and personal leadership, right? This is something that you need to do for yourself, right? To start to grow in your confidence, and integrity is so important. Having integrity, doing the things that you're saying you're going to do and being consistent with that and building on that, because the more you build on that, the more confidence you're going to gain, right? And also learning how to create emotional safety for yourself and your partner, right? Learning to be more expressive and communicative about how you feel, right? And because it's important to, build on that trust, right? And the more open and honest you are with your partner, the more you build on that trust, the more you strengthen that trust, and the more, you really start to notice, what plays out is being playing out through these, masks of protection, these wounded aspects of your masculine and feminine energy, right? Because when you have a wounded masculine, it's playing out through, anger, resentment, frustration, impatience, right? And when your partner really starts to know what's underneath that, they see beyond the masks that play out in those moments, right? When there's this polarization happening, right? And so then they can learn to soften in those moments, right? That's so important. Step three is a continuation of what I just mentioned, right? So it's really fostering trust and nurturing in your relationship. So, like I said, openly communicating your emotional needs and explaining how nurturing is actually helping you heal, right? So when you have a wounded masculine energy and you're polarized in those moments, right? When your partner's more in their masculine energy and it's polarizing you and it's making you feel less than and making you feel, uncomfortable in your masculine energy, it's really important for your partner to know when these things are playing out, to really, as challenging as it is for them, as overwhelming as it is for them in those moments, it's important for you to let them know just how important it is to soften, to practice having more patience with you, to practice being more nurturing, and just something as simple as giving you a hug. It's not always about communicating and what you're saying. It's something as simple as giving somebody a hug can really take them out of that energy and learn to soften and bring you back into more of a balanced state, right? And it's going to help you, it's going to help you have more of a harmonious relationship, right? So learning to work together to create a dynamic, that balances that masculine and feminine energies without polarization. So this it's really both sides, right? You both have to work consciously on noticing when these things play out, and the only way to do that is for you to work on really getting underneath that surface yourself. And then the more consciousness you gain on these things, the more you can openly communicate that to your partner, and the more they notice when these things are playing out, the more they notice, that is playing out because they're, those parts and aspects of self are feeling disempowered, they're feeling polarized. And so, you're basically shining light on your partner to really, let them step more into their nurturing energy, that feminine energy, so you can bring that back into balance, right? That's so important. Step 4 is to connect with the divine balance, right? So learning to embrace spiritual practices that honor both energies, because, whether you're a male, female, whatever you identify as, right? We both have masculine and feminine energies. And the issue that we have in this world is this is unbalanced. We don't have a balance of the masculine and the feminine, and but we need to balance that within ourselves, right? And it's important to do things such as meditation, journaling, or connecting with nature, taking yourself out of these environments where you're constantly triggered, through these relationship dynamics and so forth, and learning to really connect with those parts and aspects of self that, the wounded masculine energy in particular that we've been talking about in this podcast. When you have this wounded masculine, you need to start to get underneath the surface and start to really notice how those parts and aspects of self really feel. Because when you take yourself out of these environments and you really learn to connect with them, you're getting underneath those masks and those, masks of protection that play out in these familiar environments. And so you're gaining more consciousness around, you're learning to understand them better, understand what they actually need, right? And that's so important. And learning to reflect on how balancing these energies helps you align with your higher purpose. Because when you bring these two energies back into alignment, your masculine and your feminine energies, you're actually, you attune yourself more to your higher mind, right? And you strengthen your intuition. When you bring these energies into balance, then you're working through all these distortions and these things that are keeping it's keeping you disconnected, right? It's keeping you disconnected from that higher mind, from your own soul. And so you're not able to get the guidance and the things that you need. You're not able to really strengthen your connection with your own intuition when these energies are out of balance, right? So that's so important to practice, do these spiritual practices, because it's going to help you align with that higher purpose, and you're going to really know what you're actually here for on the planet, what you're here to do. And regardless of where you are, we're all here to break those cycles, right? We're all here to bring these two energies back into alignment on the planet, because in society as a whole, we've lost trust in the masculine. So what's one small step you can take to begin nurturing your inner child or reclaiming your masculine energy today? So finally, let's reflect on how healing these energies can not only transform your relationships, but your entire sense of self. We're coming to the end of this podcast episode, and I want you to reflect on this one question. What would your life look like if you balanced your masculine and feminine energies and stepped fully into your role as an empowered man, right? So the key takeaway message I want you to take away from this podcast is healing starts from within, right? So by nurturing your inner child, reclaiming your masculine energy and fostering balance in your relationships, you can transform not only how you connect with others, but how you connect with yourself. So I want you to do something this week. I want you to identify one area where you feel out of balance and start committing to something small to help, healing that wounded masculine energy this week, right? Taking little small steps, because when you think of, what is masculine energy is, taking action, staying consistent, staying in integrity, doing the things that you're saying you're going to do, right? It doesn't have to be a big task. It can be something small, because when you stay in integrity, when you start to build that momentum, you build confidence in yourself. And when you build confidence in yourself, you're stepping into more of that masculine energy, right? And this is a great way for you to start practicing this week. And, this podcast episode is a huge topic, and I'm going to continue to create other podcast episodes around, the masculine and feminine energies, because, it's a huge issue that we have in this world. And, we've lost trust in this masculine energy in this world. You see where it's so out of balance in the world, and we need to bring these back into harmony, because when we bring these energies back into harmony, we have a more harmonious planet that we live on, right? And we're going to feel more empowered in ourselves. We're going to be able to be more authentic out in the world. We're going to be able to take off these masks that we're wearing. We're going to be able to express ourselves fully and openly. And that's what it is to be empowered in both the masculine and the feminine energy. So I really thank you for joining me here on the Inner Magic Academy podcast today. And it's important to start to remember that true strength comes from balance, right? And healing is the key to fostering more harmonious relationships. Until next time, honor your journey, express yourself more authentically, even when it's hard. And then through your relationships, right? Through these dynamics that are playing out, it's not going to be easy. You're having to continue to step outside of your comfort zone, right? So, keep working on these things, little small steps, and keep shining your light. I love you. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed it, we'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to our channel and give us a like or even a comment. It really does help so much in getting our work out there to the people who need it. We're so grateful for you being here, and we'll see you for the next episode.